Hi, and welcome to the 55th TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm Jeremy Ruston, the original creator of TiddlyWiki, and today I'm joined by Branemir, who I think isn't able to speak to us. And
Nathan joined.
Mario, would you like to say hi and introduce yourself and say where you're from?
Yeah, hi. My name is Mario Pietsch. I'm from Austria, near Salzburg. Contributed to TiddlyWiki Classic and yeah, a little bit to TiddlyWiki 5.
Indeed, good to have you here, Mario. Thank you for joining us. And Nathan, hi, where are you? Nathan
Hello.
saying, oh, yeah, you're here. Great. You are talking. Would you like to
Had
say
some
hi
connectivity.
and where you're from, Nathan? Sorry.
Yes, hello. I'm Nathan Kane. I'm a developer from the United States. Uh, Been working with TiddlyWiki for several months now.
Indeed, Nathan, thank you very much for joining us. And I'm not sure Branemir's rejoined. Branimir, are you able to say hi? It's dropping in. Branimir, do tell us where you're from. It's very good that you were able to join us. Branimir has left comments on the YouTube videos of previous Hangouts, and Branimir is saying he's from Bulgaria. Well, I think you're our first guest from Bulgaria, and so you're very welcome. Very glad to have you with us. So I've got a little list of things to talk about today, but as usual, we'll stop and discuss other things that occur to us. But here's the rough list. So we'll look through the changes to 5.014 that will land, that have landed in the last week. And then there's a couple of, well, four specific topics for us to discuss. So one of the changes that we discussed last week relates to the permalink behavior. So currently on tiddlywiki.com, every time there's a navigation event, which includes at startup, what's called the location hash of the URL is automatically updated to include two strings: the title of the current tiddler, so that's the one that's been most recently navigated to, and a complete list of all of the open tiddlers. And that's handy because it means I can give you a link and it points at a specific tiddler. So if I change that to docs, you can see how it scrolls to that specific tiddler within the sequence that we've defined on the address bar. And indeed, on tiddlywiki.com at the moment, each time I navigate, that update automatically happens. So at any given time, copying the contents of the address bar will duplicate more or less where I am. The more or less is because it doesn't reflect any scrolling that has happened. So what we found with the 5.013 beta and 12, I guess, as well, was that people would make a bookmark of a link like this. So let's do that. And then they would be surprised when they revisited the bookmark that they weren't going to the sort of opening page that they expected. So for 5.014 at the moment, and I think it's one of the things that we should review today, that behavior has been disabled. So users who, oh, sorry, clicked on the wrong link. So now, as I navigate around links, there's no update to the address bar. But if I add there, you can see it does navigate to it. So it still respects permalinks and permaviews when they are navigated to. The change is about whether the address bar is automatically updated. So in fact, this behavior now matches the behavior of TiddlyWiki Classic. If one wants to turn it back to the old behavior, it's this radio button here. Now, I think there's still an open question whether that was a good change to make. I find, for instance, because I'm refreshing TiddlyWiki all the time, that refreshing and getting taken to the same place I normally find incredibly useful. So I slightly miss having that feature turned off. We noted last time that in order for it to be practical, that we would want to have an easy way to obtain the permalink for a particular tiddler. So perhaps somewhere in the tiddler info panel, we ought to be able to copy and paste that full URL, including the location hash specifying the tiddler. So I have some uncertainty whether this new behavior is the right thing. What I'm proposing to do is to push 5.014 out with this behavior, and then ask people to consider it. But I'd appreciate your input in that.
I think the behavior that it was with 13 was confusing for me a little bit, because sometimes I have, I don't know, 3 or 4 tiddlers open, and then I say F5 and it opens it again, but I want to have, let's say, initialize the stuff.
Yes.
So
yes.
the permanent permalink is not.
It breaks the refresh button, I guess, doesn't it? Really?
I think is there a possibility that we have some buttons with with TiddlyWiki Classic, so that you have a permalink button that creates the full hash on top of it?
Yes, that's the second bit that I was saying, is that I think before 5.014 can go out, we need to make the permalinks accessible. So in fact, one of the things, one of the tiddlers I got here, finishing 5.014, this is my list of things that absolutely positively must be in 5.014. As you can tell, I'm working towards the end of it now. So yeah, I mean, I think given the choice, I mean, this is a question about, not about the behavior of TiddlyWiki. This is a question about the behavior of tiddlywiki.com for us, I think, primarily. I did change the default for TiddlyWiki itself as well, but it's possible that we should have just changed it on tiddlywiki.com and not the core default. But on the face of it, a trade-off of less exposed flexibility in exchange for less confusion seems like a pretty compelling argument, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think. So, do you have some description? I think there is a description about the behavior, about the radio buttons.
Yes, it's not a. It's in the. There's a tiddler called permalink, I think. Yeah, permalink. And that describes it, but of course, slightly annoying. So it talks about. Oh, look, that's badly formatted. But talks about the settings in the advanced settings, but probably should actually duplicate them here, I think.
Yeah.
I have kind of 2 quick comments on this. One is I would think that we should probably leave the default behavior of core to match whatever the site does, because I think that a lot of new users are going to come to TiddlyWiki and sort of interact with it briefly, and they're going to sort of form some established opinions about how it works. Yeah. And then they're going to download it, and I'd like those beliefs about how it works to kind of remain consistent.
Yeah.
I'd hate to sort of switch out the behavior on them suddenly just because they've decided to actually start using it.
Yeah, yeah. No, that was absolutely my argument for the present change, where SSO has changed in the core. But go on, what was the second one?
The other comment I'd kind of like to make is, in addition to having a per tiddler permalink link or button or what have you, one thing that I really kind of liked about the old URL scheme or the old new URL scheme was the ability to very quickly and easily share sets of tiddlers.
Yeah.
So I might also kind of like to see sort of maybe in the wiki toolbar or something, sort of a top level permalink option, so that you can still quickly get that URL of all the open tiddlers.
Yeah, I quite agree. So the approach I favour at the moment, and it is debatable, is not to have a link, but rather to have a button that changes the address bar, which is the old TiddlyWiki behavior. I think it's even more relevant now because browsers have tools, particularly on mobile devices, for sharing the current address bar without you having to copy and paste it. So that's, and it's also somewhat easier, I think, to do that as it happens. So then there'd be a permalink button in tiddler.info somewhere, and then a permaview button in here. Oddly, very similar to what we've got here with permalink and permaview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I like this behavior very much, because then you can open several tiddlers and or close those that you don't need, and say permalink, and then post it to the Google group, and it will open 3 or 4 tiddlers which are relevant for the question. And yeah, every tiddler can create its own permalink with it contains only the tiddler.
Where was it? One of the recent adaptations that I have seen has, was it the GWiz? One of the recent adaptations that I've seen has a version of Eric's. Is it? No. Yes, this is it. So this is Matabelli, I believe, where each of these demo links basically opens a permaview by, I mean, obviously it's nothing to do with the permaviews, it's just updating the story list. But I do really like that functionality of being able to capture up a sequence of tiddlers both as a URL and as something that you can name and let the user browse, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. What would also be interesting is if you can create the permalink of search results. So if you do a search, so if you have the functionality that the button can create, let's say modify the URL, it would be nice that search results could do this.
Yes. Well, we what's they called in TiddlyWiki Classic? They were called paramifiers. But I think there's aren't there some paramifiers that isn't one? Yes, there is search. So I have to change it.
Okay, yeah, this would be a possibility too. Okay.
So in fact, at the moment, my provisional decision is to not use the location hash for anything other than this very plain navigation. Now, in fact, you can do search in tiddlywiki.com. All you need to do is do something like that. Only, of course, as soon as you do, then it expands it to the actual tiddlers that match the search results. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So the search, as it happens, is there, but what I don't want to do is things like that, for instance, because I think the opportunity, giving people the ability in the core to craft a URL which modifies the behavior of the thing that is being linked to, seems like a potential attack, like a potential. You could I've seen similar social engineering attacks like this, where you give somebody a URL that embeds a parameter that's then reflected in the target page. So being very conservative at the moment, that would allow for search mode, but not nothing more sophisticated.
I was thinking about a button that just creates a URL from the search results. So
and so we can do that by making it spit that out. So the sort of thing you could do, in fact, is have on this filter tab, we could have a make URL button that makes a URL of that filter.
Yeah, something like this. Yeah, this would be nice.
Okay, so the main thing I've been doing though is still getting the upgrade wizard finished. So there's a couple of changes. Here I'm going to open from the desktop. I've got an old TiddlyWiki that, go away. So this TiddlyWiki is an old one of my personal notes ones, and I've changed all the theme tweaks. And you'll remember that on this version of TiddlyWiki. Oh, sorry, and the version number is 5.09. On this version of TiddlyWiki, all of those settings are stored in system tiddlers, themes TiddlyWiki vanilla metrics, themes TiddlyWiki vanilla settings. And if we look in those, they're tiddler dictionaries that contain a number of values. Now, I realized after doing this that I didn't like this arrangement, because it meant that if you used the user interface to change one of these settings, that entire tiddler changed. So it meant that you wouldn't get any subsequent core upgrades that modified any of the other values that happened to be in the same tiddler. So one of the things I did a while ago in 5.014 was split those out into separate tiddlers. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to import that old 5.09 wiki that has the theme tweaks. And you can see in here we've got, same as you saw last week, title and the status of each tiddler that's being imported. For these metrics, you can see that they've been migrated. So it's created a new tiddler called themes TiddlyWiki vanilla metrics font size, which is the new tiddler for containing the font size, and it's migrated the value from the old one. And you can see via the preview feature that there is the old value. So the preview, basically you can open a tiddler and it gives you a rendering of it. The incoming tiddler is transcluded still in the context of the wiki that you're in. So if this Dave Gifford on plugin library tiddler had transcluded Cecily task list, when I display it here, that transclusion wouldn't work because Cecily task list is not currently a tiddler because it hasn't been imported yet. But still, it still makes the import feature astonishingly more useful, I think. Okay, so you can see it's unchecked the ones that it's suppressed. Everything else that it's done, it's just gone ahead and done. So I do an upgrade, and now here I am in 5.014. And if I go into the theme tweaks, if I can remember where they are, yeah, you can see I've still got Times Roman and the bigger font size and the margins off to the right and so on. So
tell me, the backticks are still needed?
No, they're not actually. The reason why the backticks are there is simply because they were in the original wiki. So now, I mean, if the backticks were always a little bit defensive. The reason why they're necessary is because this text will be wikified. So if I don't know, if I do something like that, which obviously would be an invalid font size, but that would get wikified rather than being passed directly through. So in fact, that's why that perhaps, yeah. So in fact, that works where you wouldn't expect it to, because slashes are not legal CSS. And if I take the last two off, yeah, that one doesn't work. That one does work because it interprets it as an opening italic syntax. Does that make sense? All right.
I think it's better now without the backticks, because sometimes you had some possibility for typos. So yeah,
I think that's right. So I was just going to quickly show you the upgrader plugin. So this is the plugin that does this migrating. There's no point looking at any great detail, but those are where the values come from. Oh no, sorry. The values come from that tiddler plus those indexes, and then those are the new tiddlers that the values should be copied into. So very straightforward. And then it has to go via the language manager to get the message. But yeah, there you go.
Jeremy, this is some stuff. So yeah, this will be in the core. So the upgrade mechanism will be in the core, or is it somewhere else?
No, the upgrade mechanism is in the core. So these upgraders are in the core. So that's quite a big deal. You can certainly make a case for them going into a plugin, and in the future, I think the old ones should go in a plugin. but and there is a plugin that they can go into, because I don't know if I showed you, I think I showed you last time, that this upgrade edition that you can see here, that includes this upgrade plugin. So we could very happily, and it's got quite a lot of stuff in it already, and we could very happily move the upgraders into that upgrade plugin. But the thing is, a lot of people still might just drag an old plugin into their new wiki. And so that kind of situation, you really need the upgraders there in order to be able to detect that and respond. So for the moment, I think we keep all the upgraders in the core and keep it under review, basically. But the preferred way to do upgrades will be tiddlywiki.com/upgrade.html.
Yeah, if it's only a small upgrade and several lines, I don't care much. But let's say if there is a bigger, let's say, incompatibility where you need, let's say, a bigger update mechanism, there should be a possibility to deprecate the stuff.
Yes.
After, I don't know, several changes, and then keep it into in a plugin or something like this. Yeah.
There's one consideration is that at the moment upgrade.html is 3 megabytes as opposed to index.html. Oh, index.html is only 2.5. It is already 2.5, in fact.
Empty is?
And empty is 1.
Okay.
So that's not too bad. Megabyte and a half of content. All of which reminds me of a couple of other issues. One was this, because it's about the upgrader. Should we deprecate known old incompatible plugins? So the issue here is that if we go onto the TiddlyWiki discussion group, there's, I think just today there was somebody talking about Stefan's new Tiddler plugin. Here we go. And the issue, or an issue, is, I think, here, describing a change since 5.010. So one of the upgraders that we could include in 5.014 would be one that could detect plugins that we know are out in the wild but are not compatible with 5.014. So it would be a blacklist, in fact. I kind of think it makes sense, because every one of these sorts of messages generates a little bit more pain and frustration, doesn't it?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure. The point is, if TiddlyWiki detects it, a message would be nice. So that tells the user you're probably including a plugin that is not compatible anymore. So, do you like to continue? Or let's say we suggest not to continue, but if you want to continue, then it should be possible.
Well, one of the things that an upgrader module can do is stick a message in here without actually modifying the incoming tiddler.
Make it red or something like this?
Yeah, well, when you see how this is done, you'll see that UA complexity like that is quite expensive to add. At the moment, they're just strings. There's not really a way to encode a color. Yeah, but I think what we do need to do is to move all the tiddlers that have messages up to the top.
You could start with, I don't know, five exclamation marks, and then everyone will see them too. So,
well, I think if all the ones with comments were up at the top, that would hopefully do it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if you're importing a big wiki, you have to kind of scroll down to below. If I try and do the something like our main index.html, you get a really very long page. So in fact, of course, thankfully, our system tiddler prefix means that very often system stuff, plugins and so on will be near the top. But obviously that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, this would be because if you have some information, but then I think the user should be able to decide that they want to import it anyway. So even if they know there is a compatibility problem, it should be able to continue with including it.
Okay, so the next set of things I've started to do is big changes to the TiddlyWiki front page. So basically everything that you read here was in place an amazingly long time ago. So if I go to this germany.github.com is the repo that contains the actual what's actually served from tiddlywiki.com. If I go back in the commits a bit, so go back to, I don't know, page 8. So this is March 2013, and browse this code, and then, okay, so all this that I'm doing very laboriously is to show you how little the front code of TiddlyWiki has changed. So I'm just going to stick that onto my desktop. Right. So isn't that hilarious? Wow. 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 Well, I'm really glad I did that. Gosh. I had no memory of the sidebar being over on the left. How fascinating. Anyway, you can see a ridiculous amount of it. Gosh, there's really... I do remember this one, actually. Wow, look at that. This is an interesting little snapshot in time, isn't it? And I was still very much into my bold fonts there, and I must say I don't mind it much. Anyway, so we need to completely overhaul what tiddlywiki.com says to users, I believe. So for a long time here, it's kind of being defensive about not being finished yet, and you've got to be careful about how you play with it, sort of thing. And it doesn't really give very direct instructions for how to use it, but those instructions that are there, many of them. Oh look, not quite sure why that bit isn't working. So with that in mind, I haven't yet done anything about hello there. Getting started, the change is to make it be based on tabs for each platform that TiddlyWiki runs on, with separate instructions for that platform. And as you can tell, it is pre-selecting the tab corresponding to the browser it thinks you're on. So if I switch to Safari, we got Safari by default. If I switch to Firefox, we got Firefox by default. I could do the same thing in Opera, but I didn't bother to give Opera a tab. So I haven't yet refactored this text, but the idea is that this entire Getting Started tiddler should be that kind of length. So it wouldn't contain these step-by-step instructions, but would just contain a brief pointer. So for Safari, it would say you have to use the fallback saver or the Node.js edition, and then you'd click on those to get the step-by-step instructions. And the reason for that is every time I see people having trouble with the step-by-step instructions, the more I realize there's no limit to how much detail one needs to go through in these instructions to get people over the initial hurdle of using it. And even in these 8-step instructions, there's still a fair amount of ambiguity. So that's one chunk, was sorting out Getting Started. Then we actually, let's go back here. Easy. Let's get rid of that bookmark that I created earlier, because it's going to continue to frustrate me. Probably move the upgrading tiddler and not make it be open by default, because I don't think that's necessary. This features tiddler, what I'm thinking of is a hierarchical view along these lines that lists all of the features, but again, with where possible, with sort of direct links, buttons, etc., to exercise the features.
Jeremy, I think you had a quite good overview at your TalkyTalky. There has been a feature list, I think, which would be
a much. I think you're right. It's much more. Where is it here? This stuff. And I need to organize. Oh gosh, that's good. I need to go there. This is the only place that these other editions are linked through. So one of the changes is to make a tiddler called editions that explicitly says which edition of TiddlyWiki do you want to work with.
Mm-hmm. And what an edition is.
Yes, I mean, I've got some text I've been working on here. It's available in multiple editions for different purposes, or you can blend plugins from different editions to create your own custom solution. So yeah, it'll take a few iterations to get that right. The community tiddler currently on tiddlywiki.com is pretty messy. There's a big block of text, including stuff about Oxtwig, and then these very important links, which are really the point of the tiddler. So I've refactored it so that the stuff about the discussion groups and the stuff about the local interest groups are in tabs. I've also taken the opportunity to yet again change the way that we do these links. Now I'm using FlexBox, which has two consequences. It means that the number of columns expands and collapses according to the amount of space, but it also means that each of the boxes has the same vertical height. For this particular application, I don't mind that because it just encourages me to write these things at a similar length, which, you know, if you look at news sites, a lot of their layout requires the editorial staff to create content of pretty much the right length. Otherwise, you know, the layout doesn't work properly. So I don't think that's too embarrassing to be in that situation. I also switched it to an ordinary fork me on GitHub ribbon. So back at the beginning of the beta, I thought having a fork me on GitHub ribbon was a bit kind of wasteful, because I thought anybody who was following along at that early GitHub at that early pre-beta stage kind of knew how to get to the GitHub repo. Whereas now I think there's some value in the familiarity of having a conventional fork me on GitHub link. The only thing that's slightly putting me off is a non-technical friend saw one of these on some other website and was confused. And so I must say, I keep thinking maybe it should just say "find me" on GitHub as being slightly clearer. And I don't think developers would necessarily spot the difference. They'd still see it as a GitHub link, but it might be just slightly less confusing, disorientating for an ordinary user. What do you think?
Yeah, that's right. So find me is easier for ordinary users.
So one of the things that it does mean is that we need to expose the version number somewhere else. So at the moment it's here, and I'm not sure. I mean, I guess I'll try. One alternative is, even after refactoring hello there, try and make sure that the version number is above the fold. So I think the version number needs to be visible without scrolling, basically.
Yeah, I think the ribbon was very handy, because you just open tiddlywiki.com and you saw, okay, it's 13, okay, nothing changed, close it, done. So it's just for short look if there is some update going on. Yeah, so it should be very prominent at the moment.
Yeah, I think so too. So, well, I mean, the other thing I was thinking about doing was adding it to the sidebar somewhere as like a colored pill. Let's just change that to find me on GitHub and see what that looks like. So, yeah, find me on GitHub. It makes it look like you have to search. Well, let's put the beta out like that and see whether it offends anybody. Nathan, are you still with us? Do you think that will freak people out?
No, I think that's fine, and I think that a lot of people aren't, given the nature of what TiddlyWiki is, aren't actually going to begin their development or integration process with a fork anyway, because TiddlyWiki kind of forks itself in a way. So I think that's pretty reasonable.
Good. Okay. Cool. Oh yeah, I was just the browser sniffing mechanism. So I slightly skipped over the way here. We've got the automatic selection of the current tab. So there's a new mechanism called the info mechanism. As a result of it, you'll now find a system tiddler called temp info plugin, and it is a plugin. And that's another change in 5.014. If you open a plugin tiddler now, instead of showing you the raw JSON, it just shows you the tiddlers within it. It should, I think, also have a link for dragging the plugin to another wiki. So in the case of the info plugin, this is created by the info mechanism at startup, and it includes information tiddlers such as what is the current browser name, is this browser Chrome, are we running under Node, are we running in the browser. So where relevant, these things are available under Node.js as well. And you can see there's a variety of flags, that some of which are platform specific and some of which are browser specific. And I've added a few, like is TiddlyFox available? So if we go here and look at the same thing, we should see new temp info plugin has TiddlyFox. Oh, it's still saying no. So there's a bug, in fact, because that should say yes. So let me just make a note of that.
Did you test it in the Firefox browser, or was this Safari?
That was Firefox, this one. This is
okay.
Firefox nightly. So that's a bit annoying, but never mind. Oh yes, and one last thing to say about the browser about that browser sniffing is that I'm using a library called Bowser, which does all of the detection. Didn't do much research to find if it was the best one, but what I like about it is something actually I'm not exposing, which is that it reports the Yahoo graded browser level. So I don't know if you've come across this. This is a scheme that Yahoo have for, I'm not sure if I'm on the right page now, a scheme that they have for classifying different browsers as to, and they grade them. And yes, I'm not sure that I can parse that at the moment, but basically by version number they say this set of browsers will offer the full experience to this set of browsers will offer some kind of fallback experience to. And although it seems like a reasonably recent and project, but it's not. Well, look, it looks like the last substantive update was a few months ago. So we'll see. Maybe it's but at the moment it's all of it is in a plugin. So if we do need to change it, I won't feel under any pressure. Oh yeah, and then a couple of very minor things that something's been annoying me for a while is that now you can give the location, the default save location for new tiddlers for the file system adapter. So if you've ever run the tw5.com server edition, it used to dump all of its tiddlers, all new tiddlers, in the topmost wiki, which is in other words the tw5.com server wiki, rather than the included tw5.com wiki. So now we just got a straightforward override.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously those kinds of things are very easy, and you should shout if there's anything like that that you need. Oh yeah, and changed above story and below story. Right, so that was it for changes since last week on 5.014. Just to say, emphasize again that make permalink permaview button thing, it will be coming 5.014. Other than that, this is the start of my list of things that absolutely, positively must be done before the end of the beta. So I'm going to try and ticket these because they're obviously going to be useful to be able to reference them from commits. But you can see the sort of thing is this kind of stuff where TiddlyWiki's CSS classes, most of them are prefixed tw-, but there's a bunch that were inherited from Bootstrap, and I think this ancient version, wherever it is, this ancient version isn't Bootstrap based, but was only just not Bootstrap based, if you see what I mean. And we've got a number of those sort of cleansing things. I want to run JS hint over everything. Make sure that we've got sensible tagging.
Jeremy, it would be nice if you could share your JS hint settings, because I'm using brackets and this uses JS hint, but I think I get different information than you.
Oh, well, I don't change the settings. I only use JS hint directives in the source files, which is an attempt to try and make sure that people will get the same results as me. If that's not happening, that means that I'm not understanding the process, I guess.
Sometimes I think there is some global variable definitions which you just skipped or forgot to mention in the files.
Maybe.
Okay.
We've had lots of people who, particularly in Firefox, causing problems by pressing ctrl+s to save, which, as you know, does not work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking that we should trap Command-S or Control-S and do the right thing. Sorry, these are in a bit of a silly order, really. We need to review the outstanding tickets just to see if there are any that must be done before we come out of beta. Maybe we should do that one of the next Hangouts. It took quite a long time last time.
Mm. I think there are also some of the old tickets which can be closed because they are not relevant anymore.
Yes, I'm sure we can have
I closed some of mine recently, but yeah.
Yeah.
Mark joined the discussion. Mark Bishop.
Hello, Mark. Let me add you. Hi, Mark. How are you doing? I'm guessing you're not microphoned up. Anyway, Mark, good to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Okay, Mark. But thanks for coming. So now, I was going to now just pick up a couple of other discussion points.
Tell me, there's one point I saw FontAwesome.
Yes.
Do you want to change to FontAwesome?
Well, we discussed it, and I think it needs discussing further. the issue is that our icon set, I think now the icons are too heavy. So when I mean, it's interesting to have this back up, because here the icons looked about right. They were designed with that bold version of Helvetica in mind. Whereas to me now, they just look a bit heavyweight compared to the title text. So that's a concern. I'd like it to look good. And although I'm reasonably proud of the icons I've created,
I think they should stay with CSS. I think there will be advantage in the future.
Well, I can get, you see, I can use FontAwesome icons, I'm pretty sure, as individual SVG files as well. We don't have to use them as a font, but one of the things that needs to happen is we need to verify that there is a suitable icon for each of the things that TiddlyWiki does at the moment, and that's mostly seems, what is it, pencil? So there's a reasonable pencil icon there. I think there might be an edit icon as well, actually. No, that was it. Something like the cog. We've got a nice cog there. A save icon. Obviously, they give us silly old floppy disks as a save icon. But we've got things like that down arrow. But we just need to choose, I guess, because it's not going to be worth doing it.
Yeah, we have some special hacks already for close others and close all and all this stuff, and there is no icon.
Yes, exactly. I mean, although I must say, I think I've always felt the close others icon is not successful, and I think because it emphasizes the wrong thing. It emphasizes all the other tiddlers. Oh, somebody said this last week, that it emphasizes the tiddlers that you're closing, whereas it should emphasize something like the idea of focusing on a particular tiddler. So to me, I mean, that would be ridiculous, that bullseye icon, but it is kind of, that's closer to me than the XXX 0 noughts and crosses icon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have an opinion about this one because I did create the close others, so.
Well then you'll forgive me. Well, perhaps you'll forgive me for being so dismissive of it. But I mean, I think it's a difficult problem.
Yeah, it's always creating proper icons is always difficult. So I like the FontAwesome project. It's really nice. They have very nice icons.
One slight, well, I don't know whether it's a concern, but the chap responsible for it doesn't link to it here, but he's
there is some pro and cons about having fonts as icons, but if it's SVGs, it would be possible to use the SVGs.
Yeah, I think for me that would be a condition, because the thing about, although normal web designers, they really, the way that you insert a FontAwesome icon, I think the markup is not nice. Oh, they don't show it here. Where's
it's included with CSS styles in normal cases.
Yes, that's right. So you do a examples. So here we go. So you have an empty element with a CSS class on it. I think that's it. Kind of doesn't feel right to me. I quite like the way that we transclude our icons the same as we'd transclude our text. So this, to me, the icons in our environment are semantic because they are they represent a transclusion. That's a semantic operation. Whereas here, it just makes it feel like the icons are in this kind of parallel floaty layer that's stapled together with these pesky CSS classes. Anyway, but I think the driver, as I say, is really how it looks. The concern I was going to show you here, not concern, but the guy who did FontAwesome, he quite rightly, after its immense success, has left FontAwesome as an open source set and he's going ahead and building a commercial icon font that's compatible, I think, with FontAwesome, but better. And so that's kind of cool, I think. I mean, he's done an awesome job and needs to be rewarded for it. But it sort of feels, therefore, that if I was going to use anything, I'd kind of want to use this to support him in his commercial endeavors. And, you know, using FontAwesome seems like maybe it's not in the best interest of the author anymore, because he's going to benefit more if people use BlackTie.
Yeah, but then it depends on which license he has on the BlackTie, because
yes, exactly. There's no way he would be able to use the BlackTie.
Because with TiddlyWiki, everyone immediately is a redistributor.
Yeah, so, exactly. Yeah. I don't. So I mean, that's a sort of proof. I'm not sure what the rhetorical expression is, but this is an unacceptable option, and the logic is, you know, if that's unacceptable, then maybe this is too, because it undermines the guy's efforts on this.
Yeah. I took part in the development of the license with FontAwesome a little bit.
Oh yes. Gosh, so you have your fingers in many pies, Mario.
No, in this one, because I'm a little bit interested in the license stuff, because it has to fit, and I also had a look at FontAwesome. Yeah, and that's why I did some discussion.
Okay. Well, you picked that one out. So are there any others that are worth?
No, this jumped into my eye.
Yeah, I think this FlexBox thing, I think I mentioned before that I'm now saying that again. I'm now using FlexBox for the community tiddler. I'm planning to use FlexBox for the main screen layout, and that's one of my things for before we come out of beta. One of the reasons is for Ton's sort of stuff. Oh no, that was a bad. Where's Ton's top bar? TW5 top bar, maybe? Gosh. The great game of watching Jeremy guess at URLs. No, that's not right. Right. So sorry. So this was the problem that you'll all have seen, how frustrating it is that the top bar, even if you give it a background, when TiddlyWiki is scrolling the main story column, it doesn't know about that toolbar, and so therefore its scrolling behavior is annoyingly wrong. So I'm going to scroll to the top tiddler, and you can see Ton's made a good job of trying to stop them overlapping, but you get this inevitable overlap. Whereas if we use FlexBox, it'll be much more like a kind of classic app layout, where each sidebar stuck to an edge of the screen reduces the available space for the main part of the layout. And doing it would also enable us to have a single theme tweak that would change the size of this. Well, it should probably change the size of the story column, and have this guy automatically, the sidebar automatically adjust in size. Okay, so one thing that popped up this week was I was taken aback yet again at Bram Chen's ability to chime in with translations for TiddlyWiki so quickly. So he's generally within a few hours of me uploading some translatable content, I get a pull request from Bram with the Chinese translations.
But this is really nice because you just have to look at what he does and then go to the files and change them.
Yes. Well, that's hilarious that you say that, because so I said to Bram a day or two ago, how do you keep up to date? Are there any techniques that we could document? And Bram very kindly fed back with some comments here. And the one particular bit that I was wondering about was this, where he keeps track of recent commits to TW5 master through this URL. If I copy it into
Jeremy, can you enable Nathan again?
Oh yes.
There are two Nathans, I think.
Nathan, it's like a late 80s horror film with multiple doppelgangers lurching around. So it's just showing you that Bram here says keep track of recent commits to TW5 master, and that link is to this RSS feed. So this is the TiddlyWiki's RSS feed of commits. So it means that, so in fact, what he's watching there is the same, exactly the same content as this page on github.com. So the bit that I was wondering about was whether he was doing any filtering to just listen for changes in the core languages language folder. So yeah, if we go in here, we've got core language, there we go, and this guy has, oh, it's not very easy to see like that, but this has, it's whenever a file in here changes, that basically that's a trigger for the translators. So Mario's just suggested something pretty clever, which is, so my problem is that I think that's a lot of work to track all of the commits of TiddlyWiki, looking out for something that needs to be translatable. That seems like a big burden. Where I'm incredibly lucky that Bram is prepared to monitor things to that degree, but I don't think we can expect every casual translator to do that. So my first question was whether there was a version of this URL that would give us the commits just for a particular subtree of the repo. But as far as I can tell, there is no way of doing that. It just gives you...
I do it in the way that I have a look at my, I have a local branch, which the German language translations, and in normal cases the last commit that I did is the date from the commits that you included, and then I check your languages directory and have a look at the commits, and then I can see which changes are there.
So yes, because if I go to, so if I go here. Sorry, looking at core, then here 4 days ago, that's telling us the last commit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Language.
Yeah. But with mine, I'm at I have a local branch, which is my German translation, and the last commit that I did there is the last date that I have the changes included. And,
right.
And I can see the difference. It's quite easy. So if there are, I don't know, if there are 10 commits from your side. Then I go through them, and in normal cases it's I don't know, half an hour or something like this.
Okay, well, while you were talking, I've just discovered that in fact we absolutely can. Yeah. So this is an RSS feed of just changes to the language stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's so that you're right. When you click through to the underlying commit, you see everything in the commit, but you only see commits that include that bit of the tree. So that's pretty awesome. I shall take a note of that. So the question I was going to ask, I think, is now moot. So it was, should we make core stroke languages into a separate repo, and then translators could just keep an eye on that repo rather than the main TiddlyWiki repo?
No, I think if you post this URL, it would be enough, so you can see that you have new messages.
Then there was a question that. Moving on, in fact, to a completely different topic, it's a question that Mario raised, which is that in the core at the moment, we have this file, which is in the utils folder, and it's browser version of HTTP request. So it wraps up XML HTTP request and has a ready state handler, does some basic header handling. Mario raised the question of
Jeremy, sorry. Nathan is still muted again.
Oh, no.
Or not still, but again.
Oh. Nathan, hello.
Sorry about that.
It's busy in and out of the Hangout today. So yes, this is ancient code. This is very, very, very old TiddlyWiki classic code. Let's just have a quick look. The TiddlyWiki classic code is oh gosh, I suppose that TiddlyWiki classic doesn't actually use XML HTTP request anymore, does it?
I think it uses it, but there is some wrapper functions, which is
no, because it's not. It's only showing up inside the compressed jQuery code. This is looking at the source of classic TiddlyWiki.
Yeah, there is a wrapper. There is a wrapper for the old functions, and then it calls jQuery.
But I think we deprecated the. Say it was something like HTTP. Yeah, do HTTP. That's the one, and it now calls this guy. Yeah. Okay. So this is pretty. No, this actually is completely different code. This is completely different. It does indeed drop down into the jQuery Ajax call. So wherever the hell this code came from, this HTTP request code, it wasn't TiddlyWiki Classic in point of fact. But it's a very vanilla XML HTTP request wrapper. It is used in quite a few places. If we search for that, it's used by the It's used by the TiddlyWeb adapter in quite a few places. Okay, so Mario's question was, Jeremy, if we're going to have an HTTP request wrapper, for goodness sake, can't it be something a little bit more modern than that? And there are, I think I've seen a few. Just choosing one at random, but here's XML HTTP request wrapped up into a promise. Now, at the moment, TiddlyWiki core does not use promises. So I noticed that promises are coming to JavaScript, but their promises are not in ECMAScript 5, which I guess is what we're targeting. And I'm very reluctant to add a promises library to the core, simply because the core currently doesn't need it, and we're trying to keep the core as small as possible. But Mario's point is, I think, that it would be nice when writing plugins and so on that do XML, do HTTP stuff, it would be nice to have a convenient wrapper for it. So I guess one answer is then you should use a library that provides that. Then the question becomes pretty much the same as we had with jQuery and TiddlyWiki Classic, but what if there are several plugins that all want to use the same promises library, blah, blah, blah. So one solution could be that for things like that, for things like promises, that we do official TiddlyWiki plugins that then other plugins can set as a dependency, so that we have shared instances of things like underscore and jQuery.
Yeah, I think there are several promise libraries, and some of them are just providing very basic support, so it's just a bare minimum. But then there are some really advanced ones which have some, let's say, additional features that makes it easier to write, let's say, readable code. The problem is that there are several of them, and all of them are different. But I think some time ago, Mozilla also created something which also has only the bare minimum and should be compatible with the ECMAScript definition. But I didn't check it lately.
No, well, I'm certainly open to suggestions, and as to say, the concerns would be those things really about bloating the core. Is pretty much.
Yeah, I also want to have something which is really small, but let's say makes it easier for plugin authors that have to have connection with Ajax libraries.
Yeah.
So in special case, I'm interested in the Throwbox API.
Yeah.
I did post a link there, and I think for everyone which has a similar, let's say, interest, it would make creating plugins a little bit easier.
Okay, I remember Throwbox. Yeah.
This was the open photo.
Yeah, very nice
Project.
Okay, I was just going to add, actually, if we do add a promises library, there certainly is various bits and pieces of callback-based code that would be worth reviewing. I don't feel that it's particularly threatening to have that callback-based code at the moment, but if we are going to embrace a promises library, we obviously might as well.
Yeah, I think I did with TiddlyWiki Classic. I did create some add-ons for the highlighter plugin.
Yeah.
And if you use the promises, so in this case it was possible to use the jQuery promise implementation, which is different to the standard.
Yeah.
But anyway, the code is much easier. It's also easier to read and easier to write, and the programming is more straightforward than with all the nested callback stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the good thing at the moment is there is very little nested callback code in TiddlyWiki core. There's a number of places where there's actually too much nested code in boot.js, but that mostly isn't callback related. Okay, so open suggestions. If you've got a specific library in mind, then let's make the case and have a look.
Okay.
So the next thing is this, which I seem to have mislinked. So I think I showed you before that the two German master's students who have done an assignment on TiddlyWiki, they produced documentation in tech format. So their assignment was reverse.
Can you are there some links somewhere?
Oh yes. So here, there's the link to the PDF, and then I'm also going to show you. Here's the link to the TiddlyWiki version. So their assignment was to reverse engineer a complicated bit of software, and they chose TiddlyWiki, I think, because their tutor suggested it. And I think I've already shown you this document. I consider it to be a pretty impressive piece of work. They've got into quite a lot of detail about how TiddlyWiki works. Anyway, when I saw this, I was interested in the idea of using the documentation they'd produced as part of the basis for tiddlywiki.com's documentation. So I asked them to consider refactoring the material as a wiki, and that's what they've done here. So it's actually quite a nice example of flicking between. You can see this is a link-enabled PDF, although I really don't like the way the links are rendered. So there's a very direct correspondence between individual tiddlers here and tiddlers in their table of contents. Sorry, Maria.
How do they produce the TiddlyWiki?
That I don't know at the moment. I asked them if there's a GitHub repo containing the wiki, because there's a GitHub repo here that contains the tech version. So that's this guy, and it also contains the source code of the plugins that they developed to test their understanding of TiddlyWiki. which are also pretty good, I think, as example plugins for us. So there's this going on that Christian have produced that. We've also recently Stephen Sokolow, who has actually, I think, been around for quite a while, has just submitted a pull request for improvements to the TiddlyWiki architecture documentation, which are here. He's also included a diagram, which is here. What we've decided to do at the moment with Stephen's stuff is to pull the text, but not to pull the graphic at this point, on the basis that it's, I think it doesn't quite work yet. I can see what it's trying to convey, but I think by using the same type of box for many different types of entity, and there being perhaps a lack of clarity about what the direction indicators on the arrows indicate, so less certain about the diagram. I think we need to do some more work. What I'm hoping to do then is to take, I just actually want to show you, in Christian's work, they've produced some diagrams. So they've included my ones, but they've also made this rather cracking picture, which I really like. So it's showing, there's the DOM being selectively updated from the wiki store. We've got a saber that can generate a local HTML file and a deserializer that can read it. And then off to the side in a different color, they got the sync adapter talking to the node server. So I quite like that. It complements the other diagrams that I've done. They've also got a really nice startup timeline. So I don't know how clearly this is, but it's those are the steps in boot prefix. Those are the steps in boot.js. Those are the steps in the various startup modules. So I quite like the idea of an extension of this. I also really like the way both the x and the y-axis are labeled time. I don't know enough about maths to know how we can say this is the major axis and this is the minor axis, but their pièce de résistance is this amazing piece of work, which I love. So it's make ourselves a bit bigger. Well, I think you can see we've got the boot prefix in the middle. The microkernel means boot.js, the startup modules that are called by that. And then you can see around the outside, Wikidata parsing, the event mechanism, the widget system, caching, transclusion, filter mechanism, root widget, saver modules, sync adapter as the sort of outer edges, and then hard drive and remote TiddlyWiki as the things that those two guys are talking to. So you can see it's the idea is in the middle is the stuff that is established first, and is the center, and the attempt is that each segment communicates with those things in the lower layers than it is. So transclusion, I think, it's not just saying transclusion talks to caching and filter mechanism, it's saying transclusion talks to all of these things, is how I interpret it. Anyway, I think it's a really nice type of diagram, and it helps to inspire me to think of more.
Can you explain again why they did this?
So there, as I understand it, they were asked, they're doing a, I can't remember the name of the school, I'm so sorry. They're at a some fairly eminent school in Germany, by which I mean university, and they're doing a software engineering course. They were asked as one of their assignments to reverse engineer and document a substantial piece of software. And I think that their supervisor, so the guy who set the assignment, suggested TiddlyWiki as one of the options. And I think I said I met the two guys, Christian, a couple of weeks ago when I was in Dusseldorf for the InnoQ talk, and they gave me to understand that they'd been really enjoying the project and learned a lot from it, which is great. But as I say, it's been terrific for me. I mean, really helped. I think I've talked about this before, that I have continual anxiety that the documentation for TiddlyWiki is not good enough, and it's clearly, it's quite an existential point. It's never going to be good enough, because even in cases where there is clear documentation on tiddlywiki.com, people don't find it. So, you know, I've faced a real challenge to, it means, I think, that TiddlyWiki needs to be usable without documentation and without reference to tiddlywiki.com. And that's fine. It's a reasonable challenge, but it's one of the reasons why I'm being, I think, quite ruthless to try and keep the core edition of TiddlyWiki as simple as possible, so that we do have a chance. But what these guys are showing is that even the most exotic inwardness of TiddlyWiki, so by exotic inwardness I mean aspects of TiddlyWiki that I think are desperately important, but which don't seem to me to be particularly clearly displayed, that they're tractable and visible. So these guys, from their language and from their, yeah, I think you can tell that they've dived quite deep into it. So it validates the idea that although TiddlyWiki's documentation is inadequate, the code is tractable, and I still maintain that, without wishing to be defensive, that although my style of JavaScript coding is absolutely not the most fashionable word in kind of brevity. I mean, I think a lot of JavaScript code is optimized for typing it, which just annoys the hell out of me, because you only type the damn stuff once, and it's endlessly sitting there rereading it. So I would argue that my code has more comments than a lot of code that I read, and I would also argue that an awful lot of the time I do a reasonable job, not all the time by any means, of splitting it up into relatively small modules. It's relatively unusual to have to maintain one's thread over more than a few dozen lines. He says, flicking through and finding a few big functions.
Yeah, that's right. So I think TiddlyWiki source code is reasonably structured, and you need a good global search. So if your editor has a good global search, then you find all the references, and then you get a good overview. Yeah, so I think that the ultimate challenge would be that you have or get a minified version of the core and then do reverse engineering. This would be really fun.
So the plan is obviously here we've got let's see how much material. There's quite a lot of material here, 17 pages as a PDF. So one of the things that I need to do as part of this is to move all the developer documentation to a new dev wiki. So the idea is it would be can't even type, sorry, tiddlywiki.com /dev would be the idea, and that several people have commented how frustrating it is that when you're on tiddlywiki.com, certain sort of straightforward user-facing things end up getting you kind of that kind of thing, I guess, is very sort of internal. How many things are tagged dev? So that many, and that's quite a lot of stuff to sort of show up in search results inappropriately. But one of this reminds me actually something I did that was wrong, I think, originally, is that instructions. So this tiddler file stuff. This is about in the Node.js edition. What are the file formats that you can store tiddlers in? That, I think, should not be in the dev wiki. I think that should be in the user wiki. So in other words, the dev wiki should literally be for people who are doing JavaScript programming in TiddlyWiki. and for people using the Node.js edition, but not as developers, I think they should be completely served by the tiddlywiki.com documentation.
Jeremy, what's about your plans to have, let's say, the front page a little bit more like the TalkyTalky stuff?
Yeah, that's still very much what I'm thinking about. So to remind people, the TalkyTalky stuff is like this. And the observation is that lots of sites about software projects have this sort of horizontal segment feel. I always say this, and then whenever we look for examples, they never are like that, I've noticed. So your one, yeah, your one's not is like that. It's not as, it's sort of halfway between the horizontal segment cliche and the slightly enterprisey webby cliche, I guess. So when you look at this guy, you can see how it's really just a ordinary TiddlyWiki with a special theme. The theme is called Punch, and so yes, one of the things I might do is bring Punch in. Possibly also hiding the sidebar. The thing I'm not certain about is that I could make it so that the all those vertical segments are within the hello there tiddler. So there's a bunch of options. I can do what I do here, which is that the main UI could be above all of the tiddlers. So if I open some tiddlers, yeah, so now you can see that that's displayed, but it's not a tiddler. So tiddlywiki.com could be kind of like this, where there's no tiddlers open by default. If they click on a link, then tiddlers start opening underneath. That's at one extreme. The next extreme is that hello there has those, for instance, has 3 horizontal segments with a picture there, picture on the left of the next segment, on the right of the next segment, just as, well, actually these pictures are all on the same side. Suddenly, I'll start messing around with it, but I know that I believe that the thing to address first is the text. That's now the most important bit of the user interface that I need to work on. So, I think now that's everything that had gone in the original list that we've now talked about. There is something on the back of my mind that I'm sure it'll come back to me.
So there is not much left for the to-dos, right? So
really not much left.
Last time you said that you changed some of the to-do list to after the 5 release.
Yeah. So now the roadmap.
Roadmap, yeah, it's the tiddler.
So now says this actually, having refactored it this much, we no longer need a tiddler called roadmap, I think. Or if we do, it needs to be a roadmap for what happens after we go
next steps
out
or
of
something.
beta.
Yeah.
But the reason why I kept it was to keep this list of things that we've ended up deferring from the roadmap. But yes, I think, well, so I've been saying for a while, I think this guy, the upgrade mechanism, is the big obstacle that we've faced until now, and I think now we're ready. So the plan, it also says we'll do the release in September, around the time of TiddlyWiki's 10th anniversary. So that's the 20th of September is when TiddlyWiki will be 10 years old, and I think that's pretty good from here. It's like 6 or 8 weeks away. We've got that should be enough time to get everything shipshape. Fingers crossed. So, any topics from you guys?
No, not from my side.
One thing that kind of came up in discussion with some folks in the past week. What's the easiest way right now, I guess, for a group of multiple users to start using TiddlyWiki with some form of roles system? I know that some of that could be done through Tiddly space type stuff, but is there really an easier facility for doing that?
I think that
More.
right now, so TiddlyWeb is the answer. As far as I know, TiddlyWeb is the only currently maintained TiddlyWiki server side that has roles, authorization, access control, and so on.
Yeah, and Chris Dent released
Tank.
Tank, a Docker-based implementation of Tank, a very, let's say, starting it to get the system running a little bit faster. It's in the TiddlyWeb Google Groups. At the moment, it just replaces virtual machine with Docker.
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah.
So just to be a bit clear then, first part of the answer, Nathan, is that there's this, is it get tank? Or what's the URL? Oh,
tank.pmo.com, yeah.
Right, so tank.pmo.com, Nathan, is Chris Dent, Chris Dent's work over the last 6 months or so, I think, on creating a new system based on TiddlyWeb. So TiddlyWeb is just trying to be an HTTP API for tiddlers, and TiddlyWeb needs configuration and so on to make it usable. So he's added OAuth authentication. This is my dashboard, so there's wikis that I have created. Here we go. You can make what's called a composition, which is basically a view on the tiddlers in Tank and then expose them within TiddlyWiki. So there's still some work that we need to do to make TiddlyWiki 5 work really well on Tank, but Chris has got a very basic level of operation working.
Mm-hmm. So and the promise-based HTTP request API would help there too, I think.
Yes, I'm sure it would. What it doesn't do at the moment is bake tiddlers into a TiddlyWiki. So with my way of looking at things, that was historically really TiddlyWeb's role, was to pull tiddlers out of somewhere and stitch them together to be a TiddlyWiki. What Chris has ended up building is where that role of stitching tiddlers together is now really the role of a plugin that actually, I mean, could be the role of a plugin, but a plugin that doesn't actually exist, because it turns out that when you're online, the approach of loading an empty TiddlyWiki that then loads all the tiddlers at startup is a lot easier to manage. But it does mean that it's a slightly different beast than TiddlySpace. But then now the client side of TiddlyWiki 5 can do things like save the wiki in some specific format that you want or something. So we were much less dependent on the server doing the stitching than we were.
I think Nathan, I think you want to have a Node.js backend, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think that our Node.js code, by our, I mean TiddlyWiki 5's, the server here is getting too long. Okay, I think this is it started out life as a really simple server module, and I got away without really structuring it. Everything's all just in one file. To begin with, I didn't do password support, but now we've got basic authentication credential support. I think it's going to keep growing. What I'd really like to do is to refactor it so that the server subsystem is separate to the command subsystem. So the server command should instantiate a server module that, something like that, attached to a particular wiki object. But it shouldn't embed all of the HTTP serving code. Sorry, Barry.
Jeremy, yeah. I think there is one question. If you want to stay with the recipes and bag, let's say, mechanism that was introduced with TiddlyWeb, or if you don't want to stand with this mechanism, because otherwise, if there should be recipes and bags and users, then TiddlyWeb is, let's say, the basic implementation of TiddlyWeb, and TiddlyWiki should be able to handle or to communicate with the TiddlyWeb backend. But if you don't use the recipes and bags mechanism anymore, then you build a new product basically.
So in the original, the way that I think I originally envisaged TiddlyWeb was that the bags and recipes were intended to be a server-side abstraction that wouldn't be visible from the client. So in my head, and I'm talking about like 2009, the client would still just see a flat space of tiddlers, and the server would make decisions about which tiddlers belong in which bags, and some of that it would do through recipes that combine tiddlers in different bags. Now that turned out to not be the case. It turned out that to write a TiddlyWiki client for TiddlyWeb, the TiddlyWiki client absolutely needs to know about bags and recipes. Currently, the TiddlyWiki 5 client-side stuff fudges it by making appalling assumptions that there is only a single recipe called default and a few things like that. And yeah, we are at a bit of a crunch point. The prompt for the crunch point is that one of the remaining problems with all TiddlyWiki 5 to TiddlyWeb integration is that the way that we create temporary tiddlers. So at the moment, each time I do that, a temporary tiddler is created, a temporary system tiddler is created somewhere down here. So that's, yeah, you can see it appearing and disappearing down at the bottom right. And of course, those will get currently synced to the server. And they should be synced to the server because part of the goal is, as with a normal web application, that the user can press refresh and they get back to exactly where they were. So the idea of persisting state to the server is correct. The problem is that it's shared. And so a particular problem that you get both with TiddlyWeb and with TiddlySpot is that if I set a username here, that's obviously stored in a tiddler status username that gets synced and everybody else gets the same username. So there's a definite problem there that has to be fixed, which is that certain tiddlers need to be skimmed off, and in the case of TiddlyWeb, stored in a separate per user bag, and that's necessary to give us multi-user support.
Yeah, with TiddlyWeb, if TiddlyWeb is set up in the right way, then it will automatically be synced back to the right bag. So because if it's from my bag, TiddlyWeb always tries to use the same bag where the tiddler comes from, if it has write access, and if it hasn't, it uses the topmost one. So in normal cases, if I open a bag with all the state information, it's mine. I can sync all the information.
But the trouble is that with there's two different types of tiddlers that you create. One is a state tiddler and one is a content tiddler. And you want the content tiddlers to go into a content bag and the state tiddlers to go to a Mario bag. So we need some filtering. Now the question then is, what do we could incorporate the bag and recipe model in the TiddlyWiki client, so that the TiddlyWiki store would be a recipe combining tiddlers from certain bags, and then those bags would each sort of independently sync back to the server, or something else. So it's a kind of I'm not sure really the best way to take that. I think that the bits of TiddlyWeb that TiddlyWeb is a highly experimental project. It was us and TiddlySpace, for that matter, us learning how to do this stuff.
I think there is TiddlySpace knows about, or let's say the client side of TiddlySpace knows about recipes and bags, and in the way it works, there is some really cool projects that could be done, or which is let's say Mbed, for example, and now Tank. I think Chris tries to simplify the mechanism again, because the composition is just, let's say, one bag that combines, let's say in this case, a TiddlyWiki with only one bag. But then you have the problem that what happens if I want to include content from other users, because this makes the UI much more complicated.
And the trouble is, the more of that stuff that's reflected in the client, it really slows down innovation for Chris, because Chris needs to, I would say Chris, but I mean people who are interested in Tank are interested in working on new composition models for tiddlers, and I think that's a great way of expressing what it's all about. Now, if that composition model is implemented in both places, it's just messy. So really not certain best way to resolve it, but it's very much on my mind, because historically I've been a Tiddly Space user. I've relied on it for a long time, and both for my own use and for projects that I've recommended it for. So it needs to be sorted somehow.
Nathan, what is your use case?
Well, I have a couple of people who are looking at using TiddlyWiki basically as something of a content management system for different branded sites. Be able to give different users, sort of different control over that content.
Well, the bit I was going to say at the end was that I think the TiddlyWiki 5 built-in server, its reason for existence is to be a personal server, but I'm not averse to any attempts to extend it now to do more stuff. It's just that I think we need to refactor it if we do that. And so if there's low-hanging fruit in terms of access control, I would be really interested to explore that. I was just going to throw in another thing into the discussion, which is you will remember from a few months ago when we were talking to John Udell about PouchDB and TiddlyWiki, and that gave me an opportunity to find out up-to-date information about CouchDB, because I hadn't really looked at it for a long time. One of the things that I understood from John was the way that you can write views in JavaScript. So he says, looking at the documentation for the first time, I probably can't find the right bits of documentation, but my understanding is it incorporates maybe SpiderMonkey, I think, and that you can give it a big chunk of JavaScript, and then when you visit a corresponding URL, that JavaScript is executed to produce the view. And Couch does, I think, its normal caching and so on. So quite interested in this too, insofar as we've got, I think we've got a couple of different use cases.
But I think the Couch app, there is one problem. I think there is no recent development in the Couch app, so let's say client interface, so command line interface.
What's Couch app?
There was a Couch app.
What is it?
I think there are not. So at the moment there is no real development going on to handle Couch apps in a good way.
Right. So, but what is this though? This is a front end for talking to a Couch server.
No, it's let's say it makes creating Couch apps easier. So it provides a directory structure, so you can do some init and some push and pull and all this stuff. So similar development mechanism like with GitHub.
Yeah, but you see, what I'm suggesting we might be able to do isn't quite that. It's to embed TiddlyWiki within CouchDB.
Yeah.
So I mean, one might create a Couch application in order to test that, but the execution environment for the JavaScript would be within Couch. I mean, what would we use Couch app for?
Yeah, I don't know how you want to implement it at the moment. You want to run TiddlyWiki code on the server side?
So that's the thing that I learned from John that I hadn't realized was possible. So that you can set CouchDB up so that you can have JavaScript. Oh, here we go. Query server. So I guess this must be it. Where you can, I don't know, I can't parse that documentation off the top of my head. But yeah, okay. So here's what looks for all the world like a stored procedure written as a common JS module. So that was my understanding, is that there is a way of, so we can obviously present TiddlyWiki as a bunch of common JS modules. That's how it exists in Node.js. And so therefore I think that if I understood John correctly, we can run it within Couch. So what Couch would be serving would be a combination of static HTML views of the underlying wiki and full-blown TiddlyWiki HTML files. But anyway, I mentioned that only because in terms of server-side support, as I've mentioned before, I think it's kind of quite exciting that TiddlyWiki doesn't need a server, and being able to operate with no server is quite interesting. But the really interesting thing is to be able to operate with any server, to have pluggability with a wide variety. I don't think we've gone far enough in showing how effective TiddlyWiki can be on an existing server infrastructure. And some of these existing server infrastructures have considerable, penetration in terms of, I don't know, developer mind share or something. So it's partly a sort of a thinking through ways that we can make TiddlyWiki more consumable by people, who are interested in things like TiddlyWiki, but perhaps inhabiting, that fairly distinct sort of technical world of being interested in a particular database or something. That reminds me of something else that's got to be worth talking about. SpiderOak. So I assume people have come across this. I'd been aware of it because it's a friend brought it to my attention, but it's if we look at Google Trends, SpiderOak's been around since 2009, and just in the last few days had a monumental explosion of interest. Isn't that a nice curve? And that's based on Edward Snowden recommending it, and he was recommending it essentially as a secure encrypted version of Dropbox. And when you arrive here, it looks like a startup, doesn't it? But it is quite different in that the Dropbox is, your reason for trusting Dropbox with your data is basically because what they tell you, we won't look at your data, etc. But in many cases with Dropbox, users been able to infer the capabilities that Dropbox has. For instance, Dropbox used to say your data is encrypted, we can't see it. Then it turned out that they were reporting the MD5 hashes of copyright works when they were being traded through the Dropbox network. And to me, visibility of a hash of the plain text of a document is pretty much equivalent to access to the document. Whereas SpiderOak is based on this zero knowledge idea, and it just sort of looks slightly like the kind of stuff you see on websites all the time, convincing sounding stuff, not designed for us. But if we go to, how do you get to it? GitHub, here we go. So in here, they've open sourced Krypton, which is the framework for doing, I should post the link and you can read it, but it's basically let me post the link. Spider Oak. Oh, sorry, Krypton. Well, I found some nice documentation. Where is it? Here we go. So there's a separate website for Krypton, which is their underlying open source component. When you scan the documentation, you'll see that it's right. Here we go. This is about their data model. So they got a really simple, very JavaScript-y data model for loading and saving things. The complicating factor is this way that you basically the names of things are GUIDs, and which are the hash of the actual name of the thing. And so you can only find things by the hash of the name. That's obviously so the server doesn't know what things are called, but it means that it's very difficult to enumerate objects in the database, so you really need to keep your metadata somewhere to avoid that. But the architecture is terribly, what's the word, compatible with TiddlyWiki, as you would expect. You know, TiddlyWiki's benefit here is it's got the simplest possible data model in JavaScript terms, and so again, quite interested in that. Working on some of those sorts of APIs buys us something fairly valuable in terms of server-side capabilities that we don't otherwise really have a route to get to.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, while we're on Google Trends, something. This might make me sad. It doesn't actually, but it's so it's the TiddlyWiki chart, and it shows TiddlyWiki peaking in 2007 and then declining, but in fact holding steady, and hopefully, of course, we'll get a hockey stick. But before I got too depressed, I compared it with Linux. So look, Google Trends thinks that Linux has fallen off a cliff in interest since 2004. So I share that with you as the comprehensive proof that the only way to look at Google Trend graphs is to look at the area under the curve, because that's the sustained popularity over time, rather than the height at any particular point, or indeed the slope of the curve.
It would be interesting to compare TiddlyWiki and TiddlyWiki 5 as separate entities.
I think they go with tiddlywiki.com. Or is it search terms?
So that's TiddlyWiki 5's just comes out very small. But that, you don't know whether they could easily be including TiddlyWiki 5 searches in that, I suppose. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I mean, if we compare TiddlyWiki against its historical Jotspot enjoyed its spike as it was bought at the end of 2006. Gosh, I think social text never really enjoyed their spike, actually. But we killed them all off. We killed them all off. So that's me pretty much done, and I must shuffle off fairly soon. So should we take any other comments or questions, and then we'll close the call and have a brief chat before we buzz off as usual? Anything from anybody?
No, not from me.
In that case, let's say goodbye in the normal way, and I will look forward, hopefully, to seeing everybody next week. But before that, just unplugged my power accidentally. And let me turn the camera on. It's just to say to you guys, Mario and Nathan, thank you very much for joining me today, as ever. Hugely appreciate the amount of time that you sacrifice to this. And the feedback that you give me on these sessions is incredibly useful, so I'm very grateful. Thank you for that. And hopefully we'll have 5.014 out before next week. But cheers, guys. Hopefully see you next week at the next Hangout. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.